Councillor Baker.
Each is now live, Chair.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone, and I would like to welcome you all to the Cambridge City Council's Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. Now, if you are in the wrong meeting, you can leave now, otherwise stay. So this includes members here in the chamber, those attending virtually, and those members of the public who are watching either live stream via the Council YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Antoinette Nestor, and I'm the chair of this committee meeting. So please can those present in the council chamber note that everything in your desk can actually be seen online, so make sure that you're basically not sharing anything that basically that other people could see. And also, if you're following the team meeting here in the chamber on your laptop, your audio, microphone and camera must be switched off. Thank you very much. And in case the fire alarm sounds, please follow the officer's instructions and do not use the lift. So, and we'll now roll call councillors alphabetically by surname so the public can see who they are. And please advise if you know of any apologies from other councillors when I ask you to speak. So we have Councillor Bajent, Councillor Beck, Councillor Davis.
Hello.
Councillor Divkovic, she is Councillor Porrer and Councillor Swift.
Present, yeah.
Thank you. And have I missed anybody? Now, the Executive Councillor for Planning, Building and Control and Infrastructure, Councillor Thornbury, is also present. So welcome, Councillor Thornbury.
Present.
And we're joined by Heather Jones, Assistant Director online, and committee manager Claire Tuncliffe and media producer James Goddard are also permanently present throughout. And other officers will be joining us throughout the meeting. Now, in relation to the meeting procedure, for each agenda item, we'll receive a presentation from the relevant report authors. Member will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. And as the chair, if the vote is split, I will have the casting vote. So following the vote of the committee, the executive councillor will be asked if they agree their decisions. Now, agenda item 1. Apologies have been covered in the introduction. Have I missed any? No? Okay. Now, moving on to agenda item 2. Please, could committee members declare if they have any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item their declaration relates to. Of course, you declare an interest at any time during the meeting. So, any hands up? Yes, Councillor Bajan.
Yeah, I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign, and that can be part of anything that's discussed.
Thank you, Councillor Bajan. That's noted. Now, agenda item 3. So the minutes of the 17th of January, 21st of March, and 21st of May 2023 meetings have been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, otherwise they will both be approved as a correct record. Yes, Councillor Correct.
Thank you. Just on the 17th of January, I note I've got a declaration and it says I'm employed by Cambridge University. It's actually ARU, not Cambridge.
Thank you very much.
That could just be corrected.
Councillor
Thank you.
It will be amended. Yes, Councillor.
My name is missing from the list of attendees.
Okay. That has been noted as well. Thank you, Councillor Thornbury. Okay. Now, we now turn to agenda item 5, the adopted local plans and the 5-year review. And this is a key decision, remember. So I believe that the planning policy manager, Jonathan Dixon, will present the report. Is that correct? So the strategy and economy manager, Caroline Hunt, is also present and will be available to answer questions on this and the next item if required. So, John, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. We are required to carry out a review of our local plan policies every 5 years. And in autumn this year, both the Cambridge Local Plan and the South Cambridgeshire Local Plan will reach their 5-year birthday. In most cases, these 5-year reviews are about checking whether your policies need to be updated. But in our case, and the council's already commenced a review of both plans with the aim of producing the Greater Cambridge Local Plan. The review has a second function, which is to check whether the policies in the adopted plan are still consistent with national planning policy and therefore can be given full weight in decision-making on planning applications. So what we've presented in this report is a review of every policy in both plans to consider whether those policies remain consistent with national policy, whether there are aspects of those policies which are no longer consistent, or whether the policies are not consistent at all. The review concluded that actually the vast majority of policies in the Cambridge Local Plan and the South Cambridge Local Plan remain consistent with national policy. There were a few exceptions which we scored as amber. In particular, there is the issue that once a plan reaches 5 years old, national policy, and we identify it needs reviewing, we should revert when considering housing need to the standard method which is set out in national guidance. Now, in our case, looking at Greater Cambridge, the standard method actually doesn't result in a very significantly different need from the need that's already present coming out of those plans, and we still have a 5-year supply when calculated in that way. So in that sense, its impact is limited. There are some other policies we identified as amber, some issues, some minor issues around the affordable housing policies, for example, and slight changes there. And then one of the other issues is there are a number of policies in the Cambridge Plan which refer to A-class land uses around retail and some other town centre uses. And since we adopted the plan, there were changes to the use class order, bringing in a use class E, which meant that some of those policy implications applied slightly different. So we scored them amber in those cases to demonstrate that there have been some updates to national policy which would change the way they were applied. So overall, again, to summarise, the plan is largely consistent with national policy and can be given weight on our planning decisions. And we look forward to moving ahead with our local plan review for the Greater Cambridge Plan as we go forward. Thank you, Chair.
Apologies. So now we move on to members' questions. So could I ask you to raise your hand and then press your microphone when you are asked to speak? So are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much to officers. It's a spectacularly large piece of work. And it's obviously reassuring to know that for the most part we're compliant. So I had a few questions around the Class E changes. So obviously this is where different uses used to have to get planning permission, but obviously now they're kind of all lumped together. And I know it's something Councillor Thornborough and Councillor Bajan we've raised quite a few times at committee. And obviously I appreciate in the new local plan we'll be able to address this, but I suppose my question is about what we could do as an interim. So, for example, our existing local plan used to say, if you change use, we need to look at the vitality of the street scene, you know, for example, having shops on the ground floor. Obviously, we're having a lot of changes to office and labs now, and we've kind of lost that. So I'm wondering if there's anything we can do in the interim, given that we know the local plan isn't going to come forward, you know, it's still emerging at the moment. Secondly, another thing I think, again, we've come up cross-party is the kind of the lab use changes, the fact that this can lead to increased water usage, which is obviously a big issue, as we all know. So it's whether, again, there's some interim measures we could take or some more evidence we could look for to try and encourage developers to think about this, to sort of increase their grey water recycling and all those kind of things that are particularly important, because we know Cambridge and lab uses, developers are telling us there's high demand for that. Yes, I'd just be really interested to know what we can do, because we've got quite a long pause before the next local plan. Thank you.
Would you like to reply? Yes.
It's a very interesting question and a very difficult one. So just to be clear, Class E really gathered up a number of uses under one broad banner, which included retail, offices, and various other uses that historically had their own use classes. And when you draw them together under Class E, that means in certain circumstances you can change uses without needing planning permission. And in some cases, even you can change to residential in certain circumstances. There are still cases where you need permission. For example, if you make sufficient changes to a building to make it suitable for that new use and so on. And there may be conditions on the application that change it. So this is not meant to present advice, and anyone should seek their own advice in considering planning, but that's a very general overview. There could be circumstances where it may be possible to consider an Article 4 directive, which is where effectively the council would issue around a specific area a restriction on that change of use. However, national guidance is very clear, you need very particular circumstances, and it has to effectively be approved by the Secretary of State, so it's not an easy route to go down. And there is also costs involved in that process, particularly if you want to do it quickly. In terms of the review of policies that we're talking around, looking at whether it's correctly been scored green and amber, for example, I think the bringing of Class E does change the way you might interpret some of our policies. So looking at policies for 11, for example, that effectively deals with what if you get a proposal for a new shop in the town centre. Now, you could decide that using that policy that it's still reasonable to impose conditions on a move away from being a shop. But my DM, my development management colleagues would remind me there are very strict rules on what conditions you can apply. So you'd have to really be careful if there was a strong case for restricting those changes. Because you have to bear in mind that coming in nationally, that flexibility in Class E is considered by government to have benefits, enabling uses to retain or activity to retain, to make it easier for businesses to operate and so on. So you have to show why you're taking those restrictions away. Thinking about when something moved away from a shop, those policies have, for example, the adopted plan talks about retaining 70% retail ground floor frontage in our key areas. And that still absolutely would be a material consideration in making decisions, but also would have to be aware that Class E has given certain flexibilities and you need to think about what they could do anyway while not being, so these all needs to be given weight. So I think it's a fair scoring in that assessment to give it amber because that situation has changed. Is there anything we could do in the short term? Well, clearly we can't create policy unreasonably, skipping ahead of the local plan. SPD, supplementary planning documents, for example, have to relate to the adopted local plan. We can't create policy by just doing a supplementary plan. So in that sense, doing more is quite difficult. And in the water issue, it's very difficult as well to create guidance which creates additional expenditure for developers without going through that plan-making process. There are plans, I think, in terms of a wider sense. Certainly the City Council more widely wants to look at its city centre strategies and so on. So the more we can do perhaps outside the remit of the local plan. But I think you're right to question, can we do more through the plan process? And I would say, I'm not sure there is much we could do directly through the plan process other than try and get the Greater Cambridge local plan to be very good when we can get that moving forward.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Beck.
Just following up that point from Councillor Porra, I followed your response very carefully, and it does seem, and I completely get it, that the arrival of Class E creates drives a bit of a bulldozer through some of the policies that we've got in relation to what we wanted to see on our shopping streets. And I'm just wondering, given the way you finished up there, whether whether it would be a valid exercise to have a simple SPD which simply clarified the application, especially in those streets that we've already set out as having a requirement because of their shopping retail streets. Because to my mind, it's not a question of necessarily trying to prevent. I mean, many people might want to prevent, but what I'm talking about is simply expecting of uses that move away from retail within Class E still to maintain active street frontages. And that seems to me completely consistent with where we came from with our local plan, but simply adapts it and to this new development in national policy. I wonder whether that actually could add something quite useful, because the thing that we're concerned about on a practical level, before we get sort of too processy and obscure, is that that what we had expected from our shopping streets in terms of active frontages starts getting holes shot in it, such that they become very sporadic and kind of one just has a door in it, and the next has a shop window, and then another shop window, and several more doors, and it loses the vibrancy that I think that the remaining retail premises really need in order for it to be interesting to people, to create the footfall for them to survive. And I think that it's a perfectly reasonable expectation that where people are utilising Class E for non-retail purposes, that the vibrancy and active street frontages remains an expectation, because that's what we were looking for anyway in our original local plan.
John, would you like to comment?
It's an interesting question. I think we'd have to give some thought to whether we were going to add sufficient additional value to the decision-making process to warrant the SPD process and the cost and time it would involve. So it's something I think we'd have to take away and think about whether the valued gain would merit the effort. But it's a really good question, something we can certainly think about. I think how we deal with town centres and so on going forward as well, especially in that wider remit I mentioned. So if you'll forgive me, perhaps we'll take that one away and give us some thought.
Yes, Councillor Davis.
And just to add to your load, John, for me, this has particular importance in the local retail centres, because there's only, like Wolston Way, which is our local centre, has, I think, 7 shops, one of which has already been converted to an office. If we lost more of those, then that tiny cluster really loses its purpose. So whatever thinking you do about this, could I please implore you to extend it right out to the small hubs as well as the city centre. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Hunt.
I pressed both buttons. I shouldn't have done that, sorry. Well, I just wanted to make the point that where planning permission is required, the policies in the adopted plan will be taken into account. They still have weight. So it's only where permission is not required that it's difficult for us. And both policies for the city centre and for district, local and neighbourhood centres, absolutely we're considering proposals for new development, not just for A1, but also for other uses, very much look at provisions made for an active frontage and so on. So I think that the challenge is that not every change that will happen in our centres is something we can needs planning permission, and therefore is something we have, have the ability to influence. But where there is a change that requires planning permission, I think there are still some words in our adopted policies that planning committees will be able to use in considering those proposals. We will still obviously take your query away, but I just wanted to make the point that there are still teeth within our policies where planning permission is required.
Yeah, I believe Councillor Thornborough, you had a question, sir?
I think the main really important centres in Cambridge are conservation areas, and they still need conservation area consent if they're going to physically change, well, with what's been set up in those. So that does provide some protection too.
And Councillor Beck, you have one question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It does seem an interesting conversation, and I think other members have an aspiration which is about active frontages, not necessarily in all cases that they're retail. We don't know what we're asking for in terms of kind of investment of effort, and I think we would need help to understand even what that would give us that was a net benefit in the development control process. But I think it would be good if this just wasn't taken away and we didn't hear anymore. It would be great to have a sort of reasoned response when you can look at it.
Yes, Councillor Porter?
Thank you to officers, because I know it's not something you can solve. Class E was, as I think Councillor Bick said, somewhat bulldozed through quite a lot of our policies at a national level. I mean, obviously for us it was in Fitzroy area, we had a recent application where local supermarket was going, and we did manage to retain it, but not through the planning regs. But I think when it comes forward, the problem is it's often the planning committee, we can only look at the changes that require approval. And that wasn't one of them, so we could look at the building. But obviously, you can't reject it on the grounds of not having a shop there. We have to do it on the material grounds. And I just want to say, as Councillor Davis said, it applies to all local centres, absolutely. Because I think, even a big centre like the Grafton, it's a destination centre, but it's our local centre in the same way. And what we don't want to see is losing shops, losing vitality, people not wanting to go there. And, so I think anything we can do to strengthen that. The other slight thing I wanted to raise, which I had raised previously, I know, in another committee, my other concern with Class E is we're losing the ability to log how much of our developments are certain classes. I appreciate, again, there's no easy answer to this, but obviously it is frustrating because previously we could say we've got this percentage office, this percentage residential. Now, if you don't need planning permission, we just have no idea. And again, I have no easy solution to that, I'm afraid. I wish I did. But again, it's something I just want to note because I think in future local plans, it's going to be even harder to work out where we're at in Cambridge if everything Class E is not consented and not going through our planning policy. So I'd like us to consider how we do track that in future local plans. Thanks.
Yes, John, is something else you want to say?
We do monitor to extent. So when we do some of our retail study work, for example, and also through our authority monitoring report, we do look at the health of centres, and also we have still got, I think, some monitoring data looking at that percentage of, let's say A1, that's very historic, retail units and so on. So we have a certain amount of data. Yes, you're right. It doesn't make it so easy than having a list of applications that have changed uses. You're right.
Thank you, John. And Heather, online, is there anything that you would like to say on this item?
No, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. So, are there any more questions? No? Okay, well, then we will now go to vote. That's on the recommendations on page 26 of the agenda pack. Are we doing the voting electronically or just by hand? Yeah, okay. So, all right, so all those in favor, please raise your hands. Okay. Oh, yes. All right.
That was unanimous, Chair.
Okay, so that that's the recommendation is pass. And is there any? Actually, there's not abstaining because it's fully right. That's right. Yes. Oh yes, and Councillor Attenborough. Yes.
Yes, I would like to thank the officers because I think this is a really interesting document actually to review all of the policies and actually to see how many are the same or different to South Cambs. So I think it's actually quite a lot of work, but I think it's been very, very useful. And the debate was really good, so I look forward to hearing more about this in the future, but I would like to accept it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough. Now, thank you, John, very much for your presentation, and thank you, everybody, for all your questions raised. Now, we now turn to agenda item 6, which is in page 179. And that's the response to the Huntingdonshire District Council issues engagement paper, Regulation 18 consultation. Now, this is a non-key item. This is, for this item, I believe we're joined virtually by Stuart Morris, Principal Policy Planner. Is that correct? Yes. And Planning Policy Officer Charlotte Morgan Shelburne here in the chamber. Oh, correct. So, Stuart, could you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Councillor. So yes, just to note that Charlotte, who's with you in the room, she's done the hard work on this report and she'll be able to answer any more detailed questions on the consultation itself. So this is obviously a response to the Huntingdonshire local plan first round of engagement on their new local plan. Their previous plan was adopted in 2019. And this is relevant to Cambridge given the emerging joint local plan process with South Cambs, and a joint response is proposed. The consultation is a very early stage engagement. There's no options or proposals included in it. It's just issues and asking questions on those issues. So it really is an opportunity for the councils to highlight the cross-boundary matters that officers and members consider to be relevant or substantive from our perspective. As an early stage consultation, there'll be plenty more opportunities through the local plan, the Huntingdonshire local plan process to comment on proposals as they emerge. Paragraph 3.3 of the report lists the kind of key response points. I'll just go through those briefly. Firstly, given clearly the issue over water supply in relation to the emerging Greater Cambridge local plan, we're suggesting that Huntingdonshire need to really explore those issues in full, noting that Cambridge Water's area does cover the southeastern part of Huntingdonshire around St Ives. And we're stressing the importance of ambitious water efficiency policies, noting the approach taken in the emerging Greater Cambridge local plan. Beyond that headline issue, we've noted, so in the emerging Greater Cambridge local plan, there's our strategic green infrastructure initiatives. Some of those cross the boundaries with Huntingdonshire. And so there's an opportunity there to discuss where there may be opportunity to join up on those. Clearly, there are economic and travel to work and housing market connections with Huntingdonshire and South Cambridgeshire running through to Cambridge. And we don't have a specific point on that to raise at the moment, but noting that issue is just worth, I think, noting there could be substantive issues arising, so need to keep talking about those. Clearly, there are specific infrastructure projects arising in terms of the A428 upgrade and East-West Rail, which cross between Huntingdonshire and South Cambs. We're already talking with them, or have done in the past, on those items, and we need to keep doing so. Those previous items that we've generally recommend that members make responses just on the impacts, the cross-boundary impacts that could have an impact on Greater Cambridge, rather than making comment on the whole range of issues that the Huntingdonshire local plan might include. But more broadly, we've taken an approach of proposing to members that on all consultations, we might encourage other councils to adopt ambitious climate and biodiversity policy approaches, as has been done in the emerging Greater Cambridge local plan. And we recommend that we might add that in as a response point too. That's a run through of the summary, so just pass over to questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Stuart. So we now move on to members' questions. Could I ask that you raise your hand and then press your microphone when you're asked to speak? So are there any questions from the floor? Go to you again, Councillor Porter.
Thank you very much. I don't disagree with any of this, but I was keen for it to be called in, because I think it is really important we as a committee sort of put our stamp on this and say, absolutely, we need the highest possible biodiversity standards. And the water issue, particularly as Huntingdonshire literally sit in the same water area as us, I think it's extremely important. And I'm hoping, I think for fairly cross-party, that we can all agree with that. So I welcome what the officers are saying. If anything, I'd say as strong as you want it to be, that's brilliant. I did also wonder, given that we have a lot of data on this already that we're collecting for our own emerging local plan, whether we should make a sort of offer to share more of that. I know that will probably come at a later stage, but I'm really aware that when we work together in the region, as we're seeing already, we're getting some movement on some of the water issues, because we are all consistently speaking and saying the same thing. So I don't know if officers might consider that, or whether you feel it's kind of already implied in what you're putting forward. But I welcome this, and I think, yeah, absolutely, because it would be difficult if the local authority right next to us with a shared water company were not heading for the same aspirations, and particularly looking at the Environment Agency recently coming out very strongly about water stress in this region. I kind of think anything we can do to help Huntingdonshire highlight that would be really welcome, if that's agreeable to officers and Exec Councillor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Porter. Charlotte or Stuart, would you like to reply, or Caroline?
Sorry, is that working now? Yes, thank you. Your point about whether we explicitly mentioned it or not, I think that it is implied in sort of the caveat at the end of the document regarding sort of ongoing dialogue through the duty to cooperate. So I feel that that point is definitely in there. And yes, I would say that would be my response to your comments, Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Charlotte. Any other questions from the chamber? No? Heather, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I just want to support the officers and the question that has been raised, and that we are trying to maintain that dialogue with our neighbouring councils. It's extremely important, and we are aware of that. So that is the kind of general direction of travel of all officers. So I just wanted to reiterate that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. Now, any more questions?
Councillor Porter, some of the councillors in Huntingdon District Council have contacted me because of the evidence that we've got, and also the ambition we've got in our local plan. They know about it, and they definitely have similar aspirations. So I think we should encourage them to follow this and engage with us if they want to speak to councillors about how we've worked with the officers to try and be this ambitious. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Porter.
Thank you, that's really good to hear. And I say officers are doing a great job. You can see that in our emerging local plans. So, yeah, sharing with Huntingdonshire is really positive. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, anybody else like to have a word from the chamber floor? No. Okay, so we'll now go to vote on the recommendations on pages 180, which is to note the report. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. And is the Executive Councillor minded to agree the recommendation?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Stuart, from your presentation. And let's see, yes. We now turn to agenda item 7, record of decisions. So I propose to take this item in block and ask members to note items 7A, B, C, D, and E, starting on page 187, unless there are any objections. Yes?
Not an objection, I just had a comment on one of them, if that's okay.
Certainly, yes.
So it's 7B, which is the street naming numbering, which is great. But I think what we probably need to look at, and certainly it's come up at various planning committees, is we need to look at wayfinding on top of that. So the policy itself is fine, very sensible, but I think we've had comments on some of the new developments that whilst it looks practical, without a kind of wayfinding for people on the newer big estates, for example, where we have flats that have numbers that carry on from houses and we have roads that bend round and link with other roads, I think I would really welcome, I think probably Heather's team, isn't it, building control, whether that would be something we could consider, because my concern is we're numbering these new developments like Trumpington, but actually if you're a delivery driver driving there, it's actually sometimes not totally obvious. I'm sure most of us have door knocked around these bigger estates, and we're rolling this out across all of our new large developments that are broadly coming through Joint Development Committee. So I would just want to add, because obviously we didn't debate it in Chamber, but I think anything we can do to aid wayfinding and encourage developers would be much appreciated, I'm sure, not just by the canvassing politicians, but more importantly by the people trying to deliver things on those estates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Porter. Yes, Councillor Swift.
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with Councillor Porro about that. Having gone round the Romans several times recently, we've just about worked out the numbering system, but it seems to be totally irrational. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Swift. Now, Heather Jones, would you like to comment on that item?
I just want to say yes, thanks for the feedback, and we will take that under consideration and report back through Councillor Katie. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think the wayfinding issue actually needs to be considered much, much earlier. And really the design panels that we need to maybe, I might mention to the design panels that it's been raised here, because this, by the time the building control putting the numbers up, it's a bit late, but really important point there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other points that people in the chamber would like to raise? No? Okay, so does the committee note these items? And then, okay, so it seems like this concludes the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee. It seems to be very short, so have I done everything right since it's been my first time here? Yes?
Just want to add, Councillor Divovic has contacted me and said she apologises she's been held up at work. Thanks.
Thank you, that's noted. Thank you very, very much, everybody who took part. So the next meeting is the 28th of September. And now can the meeting producer end the live stream, please?